One of the reasons why people love combat sports is simply down to the dangers involved. Fighters run the considerable risk of suffering injuries and, on rare occasion, even death. Although it doesn't happen often, there have been a few cases of fighters dying from injuries in the ring. Today, we're talking about 10 fighters who have tragically passed away due to injuries sustained while fighting. Stay with us. First up, we're talking Frankie Campbell. Campbell took on world champion Max Baer back in August 1930 in what would sadly be the last action of his young life. Having been dropped in the second round by Campbell, an enraged Baer rose to his feet to land a cheap shot on his opponent as he walked back to his corner with his back turned. Campbell, who shared a hometown with American folk legend Bob Dylan, walked back to his corner after the egregious punch by Baer, and he would tell his corner, "Something feels like it broke in my head." Unfortunately, it turned out that something was incredibly wrong, and although he battled through to the fifth, Campbell would later pass away due to the injuries inflicted upon him by Baer. Disgustingly, Baer was allowed to carry on with his career, despite being taken into police custody after the fight. Have you guys heard of Frankie Campbell? Jimmy Doyle is up next. Stay with us. Doyle took on the legendary Sugar Ray Robinson in June 1947 in what would turn out to be the first boxing death of the 20th century. Robinson, in his 81st fight as a professional, 79 wins, had actually dreamt that he would kill Doyle in the ring shortly before the bout.
The night before the fight with him, I dreamed in my sleep that I knocked him out and he died in the ring.
And petitioned the powers that be to call off the fight. Of course it went ahead, and Robinson's prophecy turned out to be true, despite the commission bringing in a Catholic priest to reassure Robinson. The welterweight clash would end in the 8th round as Doyle was knocked out cold, never to regain consciousness, with Robinson later setting up a fund for Doyle's parents. When later asked if he meant to get Doyle in trouble, Robinson would reply, "Mister, it's my business to get him in trouble." A sad tale. Who is the greatest fighter of all time in your opinion? We have Davey Moore now. Stick around. American featherweight Moore came into his 1963 fight with an impressive record of 59-7, but as he came up against Sugar Ramos in Los Angeles, he would be knocked down in the 10th, landing awkwardly. The Kentucky man, who had boxed at the 1952 Olympics for Team USA, landed on his neck on the bottom rope, and although he was able to finish the fight, he fell into a coma and passed away 3 days later. The tragic death prompted Bob Dylan to write a song called Who Killed Davey Moore, and sitting Pope John XXII questioned the ethics of the sport, calling it barbaric. Following the fight and his subsequent death, Moore's body lay in statue in a funeral home in LA, with around 10,000 people visiting to pay their respects. What do you guys make of this sad passing of Davey Moore? Young Ali is up next. Stay tuned. Nigerian Ali took on the world-class Irishman Barry McGuigan back in 1982 in London, England, but would later die of the injuries sustained in the fight. After being knocked down in the 6th, Ali was stretchered out of the ring, but quickly fell into a coma, a state he would not recover from. Sadly, Ali, real name Asimi Mustafa, was placed on life support as soon as he reached the hospital, but it wasn't enough to save his life.
It was a very unfortunate accident, but I felt culpable and guilty because I was the one that was hitting him.
A few later, when McGuigan won his maiden world title against Eusebio Pedrosa, he showed his class by dedicating the win to Ali. And McGuigan would admit, decades later, that he was still haunted by the incident which claimed the life of his young opponent. What was the best performance of McGuigan's career, in your opinion? And now, we're talking Kim Duk-Koo. Kim was 27 years old when his life was tragically cut short by the tough Ray Boom Boom Mancini, and the fight would become synonymous with change throughout the sport, as Kim was knocked out in the 14th round. The South Korean collapsed shortly after the bout and was rushed to the hospital to undergo brain surgery, but sadly, it wasn't enough. Boxing authorities decided, after the November 1982 bout, that 15 rounds was too many, and would reduce the number of rounds in a fight to 12 to protect the health of fighters. Kim was quoted as saying, "Either he dies or I die," in the lead-up to the fight, and the message he had written on the lampshade in his hotel room was mistranslated to "kill or be killed." It actually said, "live or die." Have you guys heard of Kim Duk-Koo? Roman Simakov is coming through now. With the WBC ABCO light heavyweight title on the line back in 2011, Simakov took on the since-crowned world champion Sergey Kovalev. The incident is one of the more modern fatalities in the sport of boxing, which saw Simakov collapse while still in the ring. Simakov, like many other boxers on today's list, would succumb to brain injuries, and Kovalev reportedly took his passing extremely hard. It is thought he attempted to assist the Simakov family financially, but they wouldn't hear of it as he was, understandably, persona non grata at the time. It took quite some time for Kovalev to be convinced the accidental death wasn't his fault and that Simakov knew the risks. Give us your thoughts on this one below. We're talking Mike Towell now. Stick around. Towell challenged Dale Evans back in September 2016 in what was considered to be a welterweight world title eliminator. In the 5th round of the Glasgow fight, Towell was immediately knocked out by Evans, who was immediately transferred to the hospital to be checked over. Sadly, it was discovered that he had serious bleeding in the brain, which he succumbed to shortly after. Evans was said to be devastated by the incident and helped with the financial burden after a Just Giving page was set up in Towell's memory. The page helped the Towell family to the tune of £50,000 and was contributed to by the likes of Manchester legend Ricky Hatton. What did you guys make of the tragic passing of Mike Towell? We have Scott Westgarth up next. The case of Westgarth is a strange one, considering the fact that he actually won the fight. The light heavyweight bout in Doncaster, England was thought to be one that would propel the winner into English title contention, but sadly, Westgarth would never get the opportunity. Shortly after the fight, Westgarth was taken to the hospital, where he sadly died a couple of days later. His opponent, Dex Spellman, has had a completely different experience with his opponent's family than Sergey Kovalev, as a tight bond has since developed between the two parties. He would later say, "There could have been resentment, but luckily they have been understanding. They have been great with me ever since." At least there's one good thing to come from something so tragic. Both parties, however, would much prefer there hadn't been one. Next up, it's Maxim Dadashev. Stay tuned. Dadashev and Subriel Matias went head-to-head in July 2019, with the IBF light welterweight title on the line. The 26-year-old's corner threw the towel in the 11, as he was taking a pretty heavy beating, and Dadashev had to be assisted out of the ring. He headed straight to the hospital, where it was discovered that he was suffering from a brain bleed, but he would succumb to his injuries shortly after coming out of surgery. The Russian's trainer, the legendary Buddy McGirt, could be heard pleading with his fighter to end the fight, but he had to take matters into his own hands as he could not convince him to stop fighting. He is survived by his young son Daniel and wife Elizaveta, who has said Dadashev would give her the power to live. Another incredibly sad story. And finally, it's Patrick's Day. 27-year-old Chicago native Day was up against Charles Conwell for the IBF USBA Super Welterweight title in October 2019, but would fall into a coma after suffering a KO loss in the 10th round. He would undergo emergency surgery, but sadly it was too late for the American, who died a short time later, surrounded by his friends, family, and members of his boxing team. Legendary ring announcer Michael Buffer would describe Day as a wonderful young man, and WBC president Mauricio Sulaiman also explained that the sport had lost a brave, kind, and wonderful friend. And like so many other fighters on today's list, Day's opponent Charles Conwell would later express his own feelings of sorrow by penning an open letter and posting it online. Of course, these incidences are extremely sad, but opponents should not be blamed for what are ultimately accidents. What did you guys make of Patrick Day's death? As usual, thanks for stopping by today, and remember to swing by again next time for some more interesting content. And why not do us a big favor by liking and sharing today's video while also subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.